All right. Dan, are you with us?
I am.
All right, great. Sorry about that. So, thank you all for joining us today. Today is April 20th, 2020. We want to thank Dan Rickman for being here with us today. He is the Deputy District Director of Upstate New York for the Small Business Administration. And the St. Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce is very proud to be able to host this opportunity for our members and businesses around the community in partnership with the St. Lawrence County Industrial Development Agency and the SUNY Canton Small Business Development Center. We're all working very hard to try to get as much information as we can to our businesses to help as we can right now. So Dan, we really thank you for being available for our call. For those others who have joined more recently, please, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box at the bottom, and I will do my best to moderate those after Dan starts out. And I have muted everyone and stopped any video. So if you are entering and want to ask a question, certainly the chat box is the place to do that. All right. Well, Dan, if you want to take it away with some updates, that would be great. Thanks again.
Hi, thanks a lot, Brooke, for putting this together, and Dan, all of our friends up there in St. Lawrence County. Really appreciate you guys inviting us and helping get the word out, so we can provide updates like this, because I know there's a lot of questions that are still coming in, both to local partners like you guys, certainly to our office, about the various programs that at least the Small Business Administration is involved with respect to COVID-19 relief for small businesses. So I figure, since we're currently in a situation where there's a lapse in appropriations for the PPP program and the EIDL program, it's probably not. It's probably best used if we would for me to just give a little bit of an overview rather than a step-by-step, slideshow of the programs, and then maybe open it up for questions. How does that sound, Brooke?
That sounds great. And we do have a number of people calling in, so there is no visual, just so everybody knows. And
Perfect.
yeah, that sounds great, Dan.
All right. Love no PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
So just, quick overview. There's three main programs that were either created or enhanced by the CARES Act, that was passed a few weeks ago. The Paycheck Protection Program, of course, was a major new initiative that SBA was tasked with to provide, rapid short-term liquidity for small businesses, primarily for the purposes of protecting paychecks. It's called the Paycheck Protection Program. And that program is designed to, based on your 2019 payroll costs and employee headcounts, to provide roughly 10 weeks of expenses. That was the amount you were able to request with the PPP program, and up to 8 weeks of those actual expenses are potentially forgivable, depending on your circumstances for your business. The funding for that program lapsed Thursday morning last week. Nationally, SBA guaranteed close to 1.7 million PPP loans to small businesses for close to the $350 billion. New York State, that was 81,000 loans, PPP loans in New York State for over $20 billion. Most of the PPP loans were under $150,000, 1.2 million, if you're wondering. So that was about 75% of the individual loans were under $150,000. Now, certain businesses, of course, up to 10 million was possible the problem with the PPP program, but the average ended up being right around 200,000 was the average PPP loan for small businesses. Now, with the PPP program, Um, I know a lot of folks are wondering, what the status of it. What does a lapse in appropriations mean? Well, that means that if a specific loan has not yet been submitted to SBA to receive an SBA loan number, it is no longer possible for that loan to be approved. I know a lot of folks had loans, in process at their bank in some status, and the only thing we can do is at this point is to ask your lender for an update on the status of your loan. We don't have the ability to look at individual PPP loans. And just for the for the reference of folks on the call, the way the program works, it's under SBA's delegated authorities. So SBA doesn't actually approve the loans or review any of the PPP loans. The process, after you apply to the bank and the bank, underwrites and approves the PPP loan, they simply need to submit it to our system so that we can reserve the funds that you applied for and be issued an SBA loan number. At that point, the bank is able to close. And in fact, per the guidance we issued a week or two ago, the bank is required to disperse those loans within 10 calendar days. Okay. So that kind of gives an overview of how the process works. And for loans that were submitted to your bank, and depending on where they were, will determine, if funds are going to be available for your loan. So I can say that if the bank submitted the loan to us, it's an instant process. There is no queue on our end. Okay, our system doesn't process queues for these PPP loans. Okay, so I think certainly we're all paying attention to the news and waiting for Congress to hopefully authorize additional funds for the PPP program. Certainly our administrator and Secretary of Treasury have strongly urged Congress to do so. So we're kind of waiting, just like everyone else, to for those funds to potentially be appropriated again. When that happens, depending on if there's any requirements to make changes to the program, we will notify the banks when they're able to submit loans to our system so that they can start closing those loans that weren't submitted prior. Okay. So again, there's no real queue on our side. I would, have a conversation with your lender and ask them what their preference is, if they would like to continue to receive applications pending potential funds opening up again. That's certainly up to the bank. Okay, what their preference is. So I would, kind of talk to your lender about that. With respect to the, I think one of the really attractive parts of the PPP program, that was the potential forgiveness. That's also going to be a process that will be between you and the bank. So the bank that you borrow the money from will also be responsible for processing your forgiveness. And, generally speaking, I think the best way, I've certain our office has received a lot of questions about it, and bottom line is there's still some nuances to the forgiveness process that haven't been finalized yet. We're still writing the final rules for what type of paperwork is going to be required for forgiveness. What's the form? All those types of questions. We're getting a lot of questions along those lines, and some of that is again still pending. I think the big question.
Dan, I think we lost you. If others can hear him and I can't, please feel free to type in the chat, but I will try to get a hold of him. Okay. Nope. Okay. Let me connect with him. All right. Looks like we lost Dan temporarily, but I'll encourage you at this time to type in any questions you have down at the bottom. Oh, he's coming back here. You can type in your questions at the chat box. I think Dan is back. Oops, sorry, Dan, I muted you. Okay. Dan, are you there?
I am back.
All right.
I'm not sure how the app closed, but it did. So, but I'm back.
All right.
Um, so I think I was talking about forgiveness and what the process is going to be for forgiveness, right? And part of that is still pending. I think the most common question is well, what will be forgiven? Like, how do I get my forgiveness? Well, ultimately, only your actual expenses over the 8 weeks of the period after which your loan is dispersed, and that is the only time period that is relevant for the PPP. Okay, the clock starts right after the loan is dispersed, and those actual expenses are what is potentially forgivable. Okay, so it's important, if you're keeping track of, it's important to keep track of, your relevant expenses. You have the option with the application to include payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities for any of those things that were obligations that were made prior to February 15th. Okay. And those are the potentially forgivable expenses. Okay. The primary purpose of the program, of course, is the paychecks, right? And the rules that we issued indicated or required that ultimately, whatever those actual expenses are at the end of the 8 weeks, 75% of those expenses must be payroll. Okay. So that, clearly depending on what the total forgivable amount will be, the majority of those forgivable expenses must be payroll. Now, the portion that will be forgiven beyond the payroll is going to be dependent on your ability to hire or rehire or maintain your pre-disaster workforce. So if your pre-disaster workforce was 10 employees, the goal is to get up to 10 employees again, FTE employees, full-time equivalents, to have the potential maximum forgivable amount. Okay. No matter what, though, your actual payroll is going to be forgiven over the course of that 8 weeks. So, part of it, some of it is still kind of stay tuned for the final rules for the forgivable amount, but the payroll is something that will be forgiven. Okay. So, got a question in the chat here about recent communications seem to imply sole proprietors with no employees would only be reimbursed 2 times the monthly net profit and not 2.5 times. That's correct. And for the reasons I just stated, you can request up to 2.5 times the monthly payroll, so 10 weeks. However, it's only your actual expenses over 8 weeks that is forgivable, right? So in no circumstances are 10 weeks worth of payroll going to be forgiven. Okay. It's 8 weeks worth of payroll. And then the balance that is potentially forgivable is going to be for those other expenses, right? The rent, utilities, mortgage interest, et cetera. Okay. Some of the other things, just based on some of the questions that Brooke sent me before, with respect to how you can use the funds to pay your employees, right? Certainly, there was a provision in the rule that payroll costs, wages can't be reduced by more than 25% for any employee. Okay. I think one of the questions that was brought up, well, what if I can't hire that specific employee and I hire somebody else at a lower rate, right? Well, I don't think there's any requirement to hire the same employees. Okay. Um, However, I think pending the final rules from the that are to be issued, the the idea is for the payroll to be within a range that is similar to your prior year payroll expenses. Okay. So, without getting into too many different, scenarios until we get those final rules, clearly there's some indication that wages shouldn't be wildly different, right? Um, you know, in particular, because the loan request is based on the prior year payroll. So, I know, some folks would like a little bit more clarity on the forgiveness piece, as would we, but that is something that I know that the agency is working hard on to get out, because certainly the borrowers, you guys, the small businesses, as well as the banks, need that information so that they can start planning.
Dan, just on the PPP, another kind of comment, question, clarification. For those, some of you on the line have probably already applied for the PPP or are assisting people with it, and others may have not done it at all. But in the application is based on payroll, right?
I think you cut out for just a second there. Maybe it's been on my end.
No, it looks like I got a, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. So when you complete the PPP application, it has a formula built in that calculates the loan amount for you. Is that correct, or are you submitting and saying, I'd like $200,000?
The formula is dependent. There is a formula. And we've issued continued guidance based on certain types of businesses, whether it's sole proprietorships or partnerships, but generally that formula is based on your 2019 or 12 months prior to the February 15th average monthly payroll costs. If you're a sole proprietor or partner, your compensation can be included in that payroll calculation, so it can be considered a payroll cost, and it's based on your net earnings, specifically from your Schedule C, right? And then that is divided over 12 months to come up with an average amount. Additionally, you may request to include those other eligible expenses, like I mentioned, the rent, utilities, and mortgage interest, and that is based on whatever your expenses were prior to February 15th for those monthly expenses. And you come up with the monthly cost for that and multiply by 2.5 when all those eligible expenses are added up. Okay. So kind of a long answer to the question. No, you don't request 200,000. You request the amount that you're eligible to request based on the formula, the calculation. Okay. And when it's asking what the employee number is, it's based on your average employment, your average full-time equivalent employment over the prior 12 months or the 2019 calendar year. So that is also not something that you just enter. Okay, it's something that must be calculated, and you're supposed to provide supporting documentation. So that's what the bank is required to review, is that supporting documentation that you must provide to substantiate those eligible expenses. So, and then similarly with the forgiveness, it's going to be, the bank will be required to verify that what you're requesting to be forgiven is included and documented appropriately.
And to clarify, for the PPP program, you are applying for the loan. If you accept the loan, part of the loan can be forgiven.
Correct.
You can't just get the forgiven amount.
No, when you get the loan, say it's $100,000, right? Based on, the calculation, right? And say, for example, you only end up spending half of that, and it's half the number of employees, for example, right? And say that the percentage works out so that that's the forgivable amount too, inclusive of, whatever payroll or rent or other expenses you requested fits into that 75% payroll to non-payroll formula, right? Your actual expenses were 100,000, and that's the amount that would be forgivable, right? There will be, say, for example, it's a lower amount though, right? You don't reach the $100,000 expense amount, okay? For whatever reason, whether your payroll is lower, you aren't able to get as many employees rehired, whatever the case may be. Again, actual payroll will be forgivable, okay? And there's going to be some principal left, if you will, okay? If you're just looking at payroll as part of your eligible expenses, that maybe all that loan amount may still be sitting in your checking account, right? From the initial use of proceeds. You would have the option to either pay it off with no prepayment penalty, or allow whatever balance is remaining to term out over the remainder of the 2-year term. So at this point, before you've incurred the expenses, you don't actually know what your forgivable amount is going to be, because you must be able to document those expenses, okay? So that's why I mentioned it's important to be able to document those things accurately and know where those PPP funds are going, right? So that you can anticipate how much is going to be forgiven based on, what you're actually doing within your business. So I guess that kind of answers the question is, it's not possible to just, take the amount you would expect to be forgiven in your initial disbursement. You must accept, the entire amount. And then within that, monitor those expenses, okay? And then you would have the option at the end of the period of the 8 weeks after you, the principal's forgiven, to do with what you will with whatever balance may be left over, okay? And that includes paying it off entirely with the remaining use of proceeds.
All right. Thank you. I did have a couple other questions come in before on the PPP program. Can small businesses with fewer than 10 employees apply for both the PPP and EIDL? Are there multiple applications?
Yeah, so great question. They're different programs, right? The PPP program, that is a guaranteed loan that you apply for through your bank or a participating bank. And they're the ones that manage that process. And certainly somebody with fewer than 10 employees is eligible to apply. Sole proprietors may apply. Contractors with no employees may apply for the PPP program. As I mentioned, your self-employment income is an eligible PPP expense, right? That can be used in both calculating the loan amount and then is potentially forgivable. So there's no employment threshold. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, that is a direct loan from SBA. And again, there's no employment threshold. In fact, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan itself doesn't have an employment payroll component to it necessarily. The CARES Act did create a separate component to the EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loan process, that included a forgivable advance of up to $10,000 that was based on your number of employees. It's effectively a grant because it will be forgiven under any circumstances and is separate from the loan, whether you choose to accept the loan or not. That EIDL advance is dependent on, as I mentioned, number of employees based on your January 31st, 2020 headcount, okay? And each employee up to 10 the business would be eligible for $1,000 each, right? And that includes the sole proprietor. So if you have a sole proprietor with no employees, it's presumed that, you know, the system will calculate, you enter zero. The system is smart enough to know that the proprietor counts as one employee. So even a sole proprietor or contractor with no employees would be eligible to receive up to $1,000. The loan part of the conversation, the economic injury disaster loan, is much broader. You know, this loan is designed for any business or eligible business or eligible, you know, not-for-profit organization to apply for a generally, you know, up to 6 months of working capital to cover any of the business's regular operating expenses. And that can include, you know, mortgage, rent, debt service payments, you know, paying your monthly bills for other loans, accounts payable, inventory, all those normal things that a business needs to fixed expenses that a business needs to keep paying to stay operational, okay? And that's what the economic injury disaster loan is designed to do. It is not forgivable. It is a loan. All COVID-19 economic injury disaster loans will be set at 30-year terms at 3.75 at a 3.75% fixed rate, and payments will be deferred on all economic injury disaster loans for 12 months automatically. So it is, again, designed to pick up the balance of, you know, the operating expenses for the business. I should note that it is important not to duplicate the use of proceeds between the PPP and the EIDL loan if you choose to apply for both. So I kind of go back to that, the importance of documenting and record keeping. And I know a lot of folks, a lot of accountants will recommend, you know, just opening up a separate checking account for those different types of loans so you keep track of those expenses. But the key is for the PPP, you can't duplicate the use of proceeds for those programs. So it is multiple applications and, you know, 2 different processes. With the economic injury disaster loan, that too is currently, the appropriations have been fully allocated for the EIDL program. So we're not accepting applications currently, pending Congress appropriating additional funds for that program. However, applications are still being processed, okay? So there may be folks on the call that have an application in process, and those applications are continuing to process on a first come, first served basis. So that program has been open since March 19th. And there are quite a few, and by quite a few, I think over 3 million applications for the EIDL program. So it's taking some time to process those. So they are continuing to process. If a business is wondering about their status, if they have a confirmation number starting with the number 3, then there's, and they haven't heard from SBA yet, that means their application has not been processed yet, okay? It's still somewhere in the queue, okay? When your application is processed for EIDL, you will receive a notification from SBA with, you know, with whether or not you've been approved and for what amount. The advance will process almost at the same time, but before you get the approval email, and you will not be specifically notified for the advance amount. It's just going to direct deposit into your account automatically. Okay. And, you know, folks are seeing those direct deposits come in for the advance. And then shortly thereafter, within a couple days, it seems like, they'll get the information about their approval for the loan. And then they would have the option to accept the loan or not. The advance, again, is separate. They can do with it what they will. So I think as I said, applications are closed right now. And hopefully if Congress chooses to allocate additional funds, we can open those back up again for new applicants.
So Dan, just to clarify for folks on the phone who have not yet applied, the EIDL goes through SBA.gov. The application is fully online, does not have anything to do with local lenders. So that's I think, an important differentiation.
Correct.
And then just to clarify, if I heard of somebody applying when it first opened weeks ago, and then applied again recently with additional information, and it was approved the second time. Is there a reason why that would have happened, or if that's encouraged? I feel like some things have changed on the application.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the CARES Act certainly changed some of the underwriting rules of the road, if you will. It added the advance. It also simplified the underwriting for the EIDL program. And with that came an updated application process and portal on our website. Businesses that may have applied prior to that, prior to March 29th specifically, they were instructed to go back in actually and not so much reapply, but re-enter their information so they could benefit from the additional certifications that the CARES Act made available and the advance. So they would get a new loan number as a result of that, but they would keep their place in line from their original application. So that may have been the circumstance you heard is when somebody went in and re-entered their information to the new portal. They kept their original place in line, right? And maybe that kind of seemed to have been a result of, well, actually it was going to be a result of re-inputting their information. So, I think it is important for folks to know that if you did apply prior to March 29th and you followed the email instructions that were sent out to anybody that provided an email, then you do get credit for being one of the first ones to apply pre-March 29th. So I think that's what happened, Brooke.
And so you're saying applications are closed now, but if someone was in that situation and maybe missed that email and finds it in their spam box or something like that, can they at this time go in and take care of that?
Now,
No. Okay.
unfortunately, the portal is shut down completely right now. So unfortunately, they would have to wait until it was opened back up again before they could before we can accept updated applications at that point.
Okay, thank you. And again, they would receive the advance in their account if they were successful in the first round, and then would receive communication via email from SBA noting the loan amount and giving them instructions how to proceed with whether or not they want the loan portion.
Correct. And it's very, it would be a very clear email from SBA. It would have your confirmation number that you had from the application. It would give you the approval amount, and it would instruct you to go back to the online portal to verify the documents and close the loan. So covid19relief.sba.gov would be the URL, the website address it would redirect you back to sign back in. So you get like a unique sign in token to log back in and complete the application. You have to verify your identity and review the loan information, and then you would be able to close on the loan after that.
And is that portal also closed?
It's separate. So you have a unique, it only works after you've received the approval email.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I know it's a little tough to wrap your head around, but that's how it's working right now. I will say, and I've sent this out to partners like the Chamber, there are a lot of scams going around. There's a lot of fishers, and scammers impersonating SBA, spoofing SBA email addresses, and using, what appears to be like legitimate, font and logos, impersonating SBA. And most of them are along the lines of, download this document, fax this information here. We would never ask you to do any of those things, okay? Any legitimate SBA emails from SBA regarding the EIDL program will have your confirmation number, will not ask for any personally identifiable information within the email itself. It will always instruct you to go via the link in the email to covid19relief.sba.gov. Okay. If anything redirects you anywhere else, it is not legitimate. Additionally, SBA doesn't send any emails about PPP. We don't review the PPP loans for borrowers, so we would not be communicating directly with any borrower about the PPP program, and certainly not asking for any information. Those are a couple of the different types of scams we've seen out there. And it's unfortunate that there's folks trying to take advantage of people during this situation, but we just ask that you be careful. And if you're not sure, I'm sure Brooke would be happy to forward it my way if you have any questions about something that you think may or may not be. I'm volunteering you, Brooke. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say yes, forward to me or to your SBDC advisor, or anyone who might be able to get in touch with you to confirm or deny whether or not it's real.
Sure. So I got a question about can you increase pay for employees with well, I said with any program. So with the EIDL program, it's not employee specific. With PPP, I think you have to be careful to stay within the requested loan amounts. You can't have forgiven more than you were approved for, certainly. And there isn't specific guidance yet on what that forgiveness calculation ultimately will be, beyond the fact that it said that you can't reduce wages by more than 25%. So I can't provide guidance beyond that because we don't have anything specific beyond that at this point. So if you did choose to increase wages, that's just because you need to do so, because you need your employees on board to run, to be functional. That's certainly a business decision that you'll have to make on your own.
And just to follow up with that, with the PPP program, you're putting in a calculation of wages, but you're also putting in an FTE number. And as you said, the point is to get people back on the payroll. So again, you're looking at total amount of wages, but if you listed that you had 10 people, you need to work to get back to 10. Are you going to be penalized if you only make it, you go down to 4 and then you make it back up to 8? How is that scored?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I don't know if penalize is the right word. Your actual payroll will be forgiven, but the total loan amount may not be forgivable. And it's certainly, if you think about it, if your payroll expenses are lower than you anticipated, but your fixed expenses like rent and utilities and the mortgage interest stay the same, then they may take up a larger portion of the total expenses over that 8 weeks, right? And you have to remember that 75% must be payroll, right? So it's just a question of what the ultimate calculation is going to be. Granted, those fixed expenses would have been there no matter what, but the payroll, the math should work out so that it is 100% forgivable no matter what. Kind of goes back to the importance of keeping track of those expenses and being aware of what you're using the proceeds of the loan for. So, and every business is going to be different, certainly, in terms of where they end up at the end of the 8 weeks. The interim final rule did say that you have up until the 8th week to get back up to full pre-disaster employment. So that would suggest that, you have up until, you have to have at least gotten to that final week and paid your full-time equivalent number of employees up to that point, to get the maximum forgivable amount. But that, Brooke, to your point, it is still going to be driven by that, headcount and your actual payroll expense. So,
And the
I wish I
8
had a
weeks,
better
what,
answer at this point, but that's the answer that it is right now.
okay. And the 8 weeks is from what time again?
Is from when the loan is dispersed.
Okay. All right. And there was a follow-up question to that one, saying, my understanding is that in addition to wages, bonus, vacation, and commissions, oh, excuse me. My understanding is that in addition to wages, bonus, vacation, and commissions are allowable. So conceivably, if you have extra funds as end of period approaches, you could issue bonuses and/or pay staff for unused vacation.
Potentially, I wouldn't, since the interim, since we haven't published the final rule for forgiveness yet, I can't say that's something that you can or can't do at this point. It's maybe an option that you should, consider as a scenario pending the final guidelines for forgiveness. Okay. I don't know what limitations may or may not be included. If there will be, some limit to increasing wages, for example, because this is kind of the second time this question has come up, and it's come up on some other calls, and I don't have an answer for that yet. I would say that it clearly the intent is to maintain a somewhat of a status quo for employment, as indicated by the not reducing wages more than 25%. But I can't really provide any guidance beyond that, until the final rule gets published. So that's definitely for those folks that are considering that as something that they may be interested in doing. Definitely keep an eye out for the final rule that will be published. And I'll as soon as it's out, we'll be sending it out through our partners like the Chamber and SBDC, so that you're aware of it as soon as we are.
Great, thank you. And again, with the PPP, that's the one you're working with your lender on, so definitely get in touch with them and make sure that you are completing whatever needs to be done. And a lot of it, there was a question as to whether or not the PPP is online. It's through the lenders, but as far as I've seen, the lenders have been communicating virtually, so there's not a need for going into a physical bank. They've made forms and things available and signatures and all of that.
Yeah.
So certainly
a lot of the banks are doing online, have set up online application portals of their own, which they can do under the program. So,
okay.
Yeah. So there's a couple questions that just popped up. I don't know when the final rule will be published. I hope soon. I know they're working on it. So hopefully soon for the forgiveness calculations and process. Great question about farms and qualifying for SBA's economic injury disaster loans. Unfortunately, primarily, businesses that are primarily producers generate 50% or more of their total revenues from their own agricultural production are not eligible for the EIDL program. They are eligible for, certainly U.S. Department of Agriculture programs, some of which will be rolling out from the CARES Act very soon, is my understanding, to provide some relief specifically for producers. Producers may also tap into the Farm Service Agency's existing loan programs, which have very low fixed rates and flexible terms. Farm businesses are eligible for the PPP program. I know that's kind of confusing. Well, why are they eligible for one, not for the other? It's different laws drive both of those programs. And the program that underlies PPP does not exclude farm businesses. So farms are eligible to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program.
There was a question a little bit before. I was skipping around, kind of back to the process and status. This person asked, so anyone that applied already should eventually receive approval or denial, or is there a cutoff with current funding in regards to the EIDL?
There is a cutoff with current funding. So potentially, I should say. Congress authorized $7 billion for the disaster loan program and $10 billion for the advances. So certainly until they process those loans for the loan program, they don't know exactly what the dollar amount will be. However, I think just based on the sheer volume of applications, additional funding will be required to potentially fund all of the existing EIDL requests. So it's a great question. There is potentially some cutoff period where all of the loan funds have been allocated. And at that point, they would have to pause the processing as well. So right now, as I said, they're continuing to process those applications because there's still sufficient funding available. But there is going to be some point at which additional funds will have to be authorized by Congress.
Okay, so if you already have your EIDL application in, it's still being processed and may still receive funds under this first round of funding.
Correct.
Okay, and if you are approved, you should receive an email, and you'll see that advance in your bank account, right?
Correct.
If you're denied, would you have any communication of that, or is it not really so much a matter of being denied as being a situation of not yet being approved? Yes.
Yeah, so if a business was denied, they would be notified that they were declined for the EIDL loan.
Via email.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Question about, is there a formula for the EIDL?
It's based on your 2019 gross revenues and cost of goods sold, and it's generally it's 6 months of operating expenses based on that number. Okay, so I mean, call it your gross profit over 6 months would be another way to calculate it from 2019.
All right, and the advance is being calculated based on employee numbers?
Correct. 1,000 per employee up to 10.
All right, very good. There's just another question about the applications online. Yes, a lot of the banks, as far as I've seen, have been processing things online, and you do not need to go into the physical bank.
Yep, and SBA specifically, emphasized that digital signatures are acceptable. So that works.
Very good. Any other questions there? We know we haven't talked about the third opportunity yet. I don't know if you want to go over that.
So this is the CARES Act created debt relief and enhanced debt relief for every other type of SBA loan. So non-economic injury, non-PPP, so like our normal SBA loan programs. And for all existing SBA loans, SBA is automatically making principal and interest payments for the next 6 months. So effective March 27th, when the CARES Act was signed, and through September 27th, 6 months, SBA is making all principal and interest payments. So this isn't something that you have to opt into if you have an existing SBA loan. It's automatic. Certainly that would mean don't send your payment in or perhaps cancel any auto payments you have with a lender. because SBA will be automatically making those payments. And we submitted all the stuff the bank has to need to know to process that on their end last week. So there are a couple things that you should be aware of, and if you have an existing SBA loan, and big one being if you asked your lender for a deferment, which many banks allowed prior to the CARES Act being passed, you do need to, if you want to benefit from the debt relief, ask for the deferment to be canceled. Okay, because if there's a deferment, there's no payments. There's no payments, there's no debt relief. Okay, and it is your option. So the bank cannot decide not to cancel your deferment. It is up to you if you have chosen to do that. So again, that's only if you've chosen and asked your bank to defer your payments. You should ask them to undefer if you want the debt relief. The other thing is this debt relief is for borrowers that are in normal repayment status, right? So if your situation is one where you're working with like the loan workout department, you were in default or something along those lines, you need to talk with the banker about what you need to do to get current, so that you can benefit from debt relief. So those are the two major situations that I think current SBA borrowers need to be aware of if those situations apply to your business. Otherwise, you don't have to do anything. It's automatic. This also applies to any new normal, conventional SBA loans that you may apply for between now and September 27th. And that includes, a 7A SBA loan through a lender, a fixed asset 504 loan. You don't even know what any of these mean, but they're a couple of the types of programs that we offer, as well as microloans through SBA approved microlenders. And there's two that serve St. Lawrence County. One is a statewide microlender called Pursuit, formerly known as Excelsior Growth Fund, and the other is the Adirondack Economic Development Corporation. So any loans from those entities, microlenders, SBA microlenders, those payments will also be paid between now and September 27th.
Are the new SBA loans being expedited, or is it the typical time frame of processing?
Yeah, it's a typical process for an SBA loan. So for folks that are familiar with that, there have been no changes to that process. A business plan will still be expected, and you still have to demonstrate that you can repay the loan, right? I'm sure the folks at SBDC would be happy to talk with you guys about that, and if that's an option for your business. There are certain things that you cannot do, and just to emphasize that, I talked about what you can use EIDL and PPP for. What you cannot use EIDL or PPP for are purchasing equipment, improving real estate, refinancing prior debts, prior long-term debts, or short-term debts for that matter. These are all things that you may need a normal SBA loan for, or just a normal loan through your bank. And those are still available, and you'd be able to benefit from the debt relief between now and the 6 months too. There's one exception to the refinancing with EIDL, and that's for short-term bridge loans. There's many local economic development organizations that are doing temporary working capital bridge loans pending a business getting approved for the economic injury loan. And you can use the economic injury loan to take out that very specific type of loan. Because clearly it's for the same purpose as the EIDL loan itself. But you can't refinance a credit card. Hope that makes sense.
So it's working capital, really.
Yeah.
Does that include inventory?
It can include inventory. It can include replenishing inventory, and or if you're a manufacturer, purchasing raw materials for work in process, that sort of thing. Depends if that was a regular monthly expense or not, right? If you think about it, that would be totally appropriate. Would it be appropriate to buy a year's worth of inventory with a EIDL loan? Well, probably not, unless that's what you typically do every month, which would make sense. Right.
Yep, good clarification. If anyone else has any other questions, I'm not sure. Did you have more to say on the debt relief, Dan?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. If you guys want to just review the current status of any of these things, you can certainly visit our website at www.sba.gov and go to the coronavirus relief funding options page. Alternatively, you can just go to sba.gov/PPP, and that'll take you to that same section, maybe more quickly. That's where we'll provide updates about the lapse in appropriations, details about new rules that might be coming up or finalized. That's going to be that page, our website, or the Department of Treasury's website on small business assistance are going to be the best and only sources for official guidance on our programs, because the PPP program is being managed in conjunction with the Treasury Department. So they're publishing FAQs and as well as the updated rules as they come out on their website. And you can't miss it if you go to treasury.gov. There's like a red bar at the top that says small business assistance for COVID-19, and that'll take you to the page about PPP and EIDL and all that.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. Again, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to chat it in down at the bottom of the box there. And for everybody locally in St. Lawrence County, I want to make sure you're aware of resources. There are a lot of resources, and certainly your bankers, your accountants should be your good friends right now. But the Small Business Development Center is fully operating right now, and they'll be adding staff as well to assist with this. The SBDC is free one-on-one counseling, so certainly take advantage of that. They've been working, and some of them are on the line working extra hours to help people with individual situations and explain the process and all of that. They're working remotely, so the best way to get in touch with them is to contact them. You can request an appointment through nysbdc.com, and when you put in your address, it'll connect you with the local advisor. You can also call their office at 315-386-7312, and that will be forwarded to an advisor to get back to you. So certainly use that resource. And also look out for the St. Lawrence County Industrial Development Agency. Their website is STLC.IDA.com, and they, in partnership with the North Country Alliance, have created a local loan program, a bridge loan, and that's available. They're processing it very quickly. So if you are interested, there is up to $10,000 and then up to $25,000 loan program available that can help bridge your needs right now. So certainly look into that program. Again, slcida.com, and that resource is available, and a lot of them are on the call as well, and they can get back to you with more information as well. And Michelle Collins from the SBDC just put in the chat that it's nyssbdc.org, not .com. And then the St. Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce, we've been trying to put out updates through our e-blast. If you do not receive those emails, one, check your spam box if you're a member, but you can be added to the list as well if you want to just email info@slcchamber.com. we can get you on those lists so that you'll get these alerts and opportunities for things like this with the call. We also have a website that we are trying our best to keep updated with information, and that is at STLC.com /COVID-19. So we can doing our best, as I said, to keep communication and information with you. As Dan said in the presentation, there are some SBA scams going around. Some of you may have been receiving calls on various opportunities and things like that. Just be very, very, very careful with all of that. You are welcome to contact any of the partners I mentioned for confirmation. Be careful not to give out your personal information. As Dan said, SBA information will be coming through email, and we'll have your confirmation number, and we'll direct you to the SBA website. So do not, just be very careful of email and phone scams like that. So I want to thank Dan again for taking an hour with us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to get more clarification. It's been a lot of information and evolving day by day. So the more we know, the better we can be, and certainly appreciate you and what the SBA is doing. It's a big lift. We understand that. So thank you. And to everybody, if there's anything that we can do to help you, please be in touch. You can get in touch again, info@slcchamber.org, and then it will forward on to whichever staff member can follow up with you. We are working on some e-commerce initiatives for those who are looking to improve e-commerce. We have a marketplace launching through the county chamber, and that will allow for local businesses to have their own online store. And we're also working with ANCA on an e-commerce program as well. If you already have a website or want to build or enhance e-commerce on your website, there's a resource available for that as well. So if you're interested in any of that, please email info@slcchamber.org. All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again to Dan and to our partners at the SBDC and the IDA. And we hope you're all doing as well as possible, and we're here to help. Have a good afternoon, everyone.